in relation to festivals and events management, that kind of thing, can you tell me a bit about your recent findings?
We've conducted a number of studies in Scotland in the past 2 years. One which you will be most interested in, I think, is the Gathering, because it's had quite a bit of controversy attached to it as one of the major signature homecoming events. Whilst, in fact, it is reportedly to have lost hundreds of thousands of pounds, it gained worldwide respect because 40% of the attendees were from North America for that particular event, and upwards of 90% rated that event as extraordinarily successful. Furthermore, we had ethnographic researchers, students, observing for 2 days the activities, the body language, the smile factor to determine the happiness factor of the guests. And that too was an overwhelming success for a first-time event. When we asked, why would an event like this be so successful? It's first time. The answer during analysis demonstrated that in the marketing for that event, it was very broad and general. They were never specific about what to expect. And so we learned that since people did not have a high expectation, their final perception was even higher. And that might be a tool that future event organizers might use to be careful that they manage the expectations of their guests so that the final perception is higher as a result of it.
Okay, and is there a danger though if people have low expectations they just won't go in the first place?
Yes, there's an absolute balance between expectation and final perception that has to be achieved. But what we found is that oftentimes events, unfortunately, overpromise and underdeliver. And therefore, if you can find the right balance of we underpromise and then over-delivering with some sort of a positive surprise or outcome, people are enormously satisfied. One example is that event was so successful, they had 47,000 attendees, twice what they had expected, that the lines for the loos for the toilets stretched for what seemed like miles. There was not one negative comment on all the surveys we read about the loos. And when we interviewed people to ask, why weren't you at all annoyed at having to wait in line? They said, we never saw so much in our life while we were waiting in line. So they were looking around, distracted, and they did not have an expectation of what to expect in terms of loos and toilets, so they weren't disappointed.
How do you think this could be applied then to future events in Scotland?
Well, first of all, homecoming should be considered a recurring event, whether it's on a cycle of every 2 years or 4 years. 90-something% of the people who attended all of the homecoming events across Scotland rated it as somewhat good to very good. So it was a tremendous success in terms of external image for our country. In the future, as small events, medium, and even mega large events such as the Commonwealth Games come to Scotland, the planners should think very carefully about how again do you manage those expectations to produce a greater final perception. And that has to do with the messaging, that has to do with the budgeting, how you budget for these events to make certain you have a minimum requirement for toilet facilities, for parking, even for monitoring, for evaluation, things that we provide through the International Center for the Study of Planned Events, so that you have a final comprehensive report to be able to use to gain more advertising, more sponsorship, in future years. So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, very positive lessons from Homecoming 2009.
And do you think that could be applied to something like the Edinburgh Festival, which is already very renowned and people have quite high expectations anyway? And how could it be applied to that?
When you have a successful event for 64 years, such as the Edinburgh Festivals, one doesn't want to reinvent the wheel. Rather, what one wants to do is to polish and refine the wheel as though it were a diamond that has many facets that you want to shine and polish, every year. With the example of the Edinburgh Festivals, the next step will be to widen and expand the audience without losing the core values. And one way we might do that is by broadcasting elements of the festival into cinemas worldwide, just as the Metropolitan Opera broadcasts are now broadcast from New York all over the world. More people actually attend those opera broadcasts in cinema than they do in New York City in the Opera House. And it's an event. And the Edinburgh Festivals are indeed events. that could be shared with the world through satellite technology and cinema broadcast.
So what kind of advice would you give then to events organisers in Scotland going forward?
There are 5 major steps to producing what we describe as a sustainable event. First, to carefully do your research. In other words, find out what are the needs, wants, and desires of your guests so that you can plan specifically with their needs, wants, and desires in mind. Secondly, to design an event that is uniquely different from others, so you're differentiating your event in some way to let the audience know that this is the unique selling factor of my particular event strategy. Third, you plan the event in such a way to increase participation, such as maybe not hold the event at 7 p.m., but if indeed it's for people such as your listeners, start the event at 10 or 11 p.m. at night, so it matches their interest and their time cycle. Fourth, to coordinate the event professionally and seamlessly. And fifth, and finally, always evaluate the event comprehensively. And once again, that's why organizations such as the International Center for the Study of Planned Events at Queen Margaret University can provide those services to help people systematically evaluate their event to improve their practice over time.